everyone, and welcome to the Nevada Lithium Live events today, hosted by Six. I'm pleased to introduce the speaker for today, Stephen Rentschler, the CEO. Steve will walk us through the latest release about the high-grade diamond drill results, and after that, we'll be accepting questions. As a reminder, you can submit your questions in the chat at any point during the presentation. And as always, this summit is being recorded and will be available to watch shortly afterwards. So without further ado, I'd like to hand things over to you, Steve, so that we can get started.
That's super. Thanks, Max. I appreciate it. Thanks everybody for taking the time for a couple minutes here so that I can tell you about what we announced to the market yesterday, which was clearly some very exciting news. So we've just completed the first drill hole for 2023, our first core drill hole, and gotten the assays back. They showed very, very wide intercepts of very high-grade mineralization. Just to give you a comparison, these are on the order of 2 and 3 times what our mean resource estimate had for grade. So instead of 1,000 ppm, we have 1,000 feet or more of 2,000 ppm or 3,000 feet of the same amount. The individual intercepts aren't as interesting or important to me as is just looking at the expanse of these. What I wanted to try to sort of impress to everybody here is that we basically have 2 very large blankets of lithium that's overlaying Bonnie Claire. And I just want to step back a second, tell you what we did last year, how we were looking at it, and how we're sort of pushing forward as we are going to incorporate this additional knowledge into our thoughts about how to best extract value from this overall property. So if you take it back even a little farther, let's just start at the very beginning, for lack of a better introduction, and just talk about the geology here again, because remembering people who are new to the story, to the lithium story, often get a little bit confused about what they're hearing. We're not a brine story right now. We're not a hard rock story. We're a cemetery story, right? We're the third type of deposit that's out there. And if you think about this, these are lithium that was essentially blown around over the course of millions of years by volcanoes. The winds took them. They settled down in basically inland seas and lakes, and you had an oxidative process. And the lithium had various chemical properties changed, etc. All this stuff happened over and over and over again for millions of years and just kept settling down the bottom of these ponds. So imagine again a wide expanse of lithium at the bottom of all these sediments, and then in our case sort of a middle layer which doesn't have much lithium in it, and then a top layer which has a whole bunch of lithium in it again. Now last year we had drilled 4 deep holes to 2,000 feet of depth, right, using core. And it's important to use core drilling techniques here because this material is very soft and we want to make sure that we capture it accurately. We went down to 2,000 feet and we were ending up in material at 2,000 feet. In other words, we hadn't found the end. We were still in mineralization. And of course, our technical teams said, well, you know what? I'm pretty sure there's a good chance that we have mineralization continuing below what we already have. Now, you already know that we have one of the largest resource estimates globally, number 3 by mining.com at this point in time for our type of deposit. And as I've said to many of you before when I've spoken with you, it's not as if we need to have more here. But all other things being equal, the point is now we found significantly larger amounts of lithium when looked at in terms of an intercept below us. And so this is not, in a way, pure exploration. This is still infill drilling from the way I look at it. This is in an area that we're already doing the work to upgrade the resource as we go into our preliminary feasibility study. And frankly, I don't know right now how all this additional mineralization is going to manifest itself. I'm not an engineer. That's one of the things we'll have to see about how they can be incorporated into borehole mining. Alternatively, I will tell you, though, there's also a thought starting to emanate a little bit, which is that as you go deeper, is there the potential for an underground mine? And this is all my just saying, this is how I think about it right now. And we don't have a technical report that's indicating that right now. But if you think about it as the depths progress, and if the ground gets a little bit firmer, there might be additional options here. And those options are basically being predicated upon the increasing grades that we're finding at depth. So Max, if just for a second, if you could throw up that cross section, that we had put this in our news release yesterday, and it's just to illustrate. On the left was the drill hole that we did in 22 that went down to 2,000 feet, and on the right you see essentially the additional 400 feet below it of mineralization, and the colors indicating that, of course, we continue to get higher and higher grades. And you can look down deep into sort of individual 20-foot samples or whatever they are, and then find, you know, even higher parts per million, 5,000, that kind of stuff. You know, I tend to look at this more as a bulk mining type of an exercise. Obviously, when the time comes, one way or another, however we remove this material, we're going to be removing large quantities. So this is not like high-grade, vein mining, as an example, in a gold mine. We'd be taking out big hunks, and what's important for us is to have that wide expanse, right? You know, hundreds and hundreds of feet that we can work with, and basically try to move in as an efficient manner as possible. Okay, so we can leave that up there for a while so you can continue to see it. So what does this imply sort of for the rest of what we're doing? Well, obviously I can't prove this, but I would be willing to bet that we will have similar types of experiences as we go down with our other holes. Now, our second drill hole of the year is actually below 2,000 feet. We talked to the technical teams, you know, having seen basically, they call it the lithology, the logs that were coming in, what kind of materials we're finding. So this was before the assays came in, because it takes a long time to get assays from essentially ground level all the way down to, 2,900 feet. But we sort of knew enough that we had a good idea that we wanted to continue down with this second hole. And so we're going to take it down to 2,500 feet. My expectation is that there's no reason we're not going to find similar sorts of things going on. And that's because all the way down to 2,000 feet, sort of the stratigraphy and everything was confirmed to be similar to the other holes in the area. You know, when I look at it over the course of the other holes that we have planned for the preliminary feasibility study resource estimate, I don't see a lot of reason to think that we're, again, not going to continue to find the same sort of phenomenon out there, which means that we're going to have a very large block of extended high-grade mineralization underneath us if everything works out well. The question is going to be how best to access that, in what way, to again extract the maximum shareholder value. As we start to think more about this, and obviously, the best way I feel to make decisions is to take the latest information that you have and then make your next decision. We may want to digest what it is that's going on here. As I said, I just gave you my thoughts, but in the grand scheme of things, they don't amount to much. I'm just sort of speculating, and the way I would used to look at things as an investor. But we might take the time to sort of have the guys really go through this, with geological model, et cetera, to decide whether or not we want to continue to extend the rest of our holes going forward for that preliminary feasibility resource estimate. The way I've been asking people to think about Bonnie Claire as a whole is with a lot of optionality. If you think about what we've got going on, Bonnie Claire is very flat on the surface, but underneath we have essentially geological features that are differing. I think I've said to a lot of you before, if you start in the east, it's deeper, and then the basement starts to come up as you go farther to the west. And, when you think about the basement, just think about the basement as sort of the bunch of rocks under which there's no more sediments. Okay, so it's what the sediments start to be laid down on, and then they continue, in our case, to basically the surface. So we know, since we went down to the basement with this first hole at 2,900 feet, we know that's where the basement is at that point in time. We think the basement might be deeper as we go in different directions. One of the things we're also looking for at the basement is the potential for brine. And we've talked about this previously as well when we initiated a seismic shoot over the property. I can tell you that even though the report isn't completely done and interpreted, all of the feedback that I got from the field was that it was of very high quality. We could see quite a bit that was there. What we expect to see, again, are the same structures that if you run up towards Albemarle Silver Peak brine mine, and again, that's the only existing lithium mine in the U.S., and call that, I don't know, an hour and 15 minutes north of us on Route 95. But geologically, the structures that run underneath are the same, we think, that come down under Bonnie Claire. And as we interpret that data, we will take a shot, again, in the deeper areas of Bonnie Claire to see about the potential for brine. And sort of, again, the theory is, you know, if you find the structure, which is an ingress route for fluids coming in, then you need to basically have fluids that are capable of dissolving the sediments that are there and putting them into suspension in a brine. So you basically need an acid. And we've been finding alkaline, basically pools of water in previous attempts. And, you know, to this point, we don't think there's any way to narrow it down. We're looking essentially for a bright spot in hydrocarbons. That's the way I think about it from seismic. It's just, hey, there's a lot of fluid down there. Okay. And now you hope when you drill, you pick that spot that is going to have the correct acidity to dissolve those deposits. Now, one thing, as I guess I should say, another thing I'd like you to think about as we start to see the first of these results coming back from the deeper holes. The drainage basin, right? So the overall size of the bathtub that drains into Bonnie Claire, Richard Kern has told me he'd actually done the calculations. He told me this is magnitudes of water greater than what's going on at the Thacker Pass, which implies to me that as we go down closer to the geological basement in different areas, you would sort of think, hey, this might be where these, you know, heavier concentrations of lithium will continue to accumulate. And I think that's sort of borne out by what we see with this first deep hole. The point is, the bigger the drainage basin, over time, again, thinking about all those sediments being deposited by the wind, you know, in the volcanoes and stuff, and then having water movement over time, moving them basically from high areas to low areas. That's sort of what a drainage basin is when you think about it. I think all of that is very, very supportive for our underlying thesis, again, that, you know, even though we have more than enough resource here for our current PEA and our anticipated 30,000 tons a year for 40 years going forward, we're certainly going to be looking to upgrade this as we go forward with a preliminary feasibility study. But if we continue to see things in different, basically, depths, which are amenable to, we think, different types of mining, we will do our best to try to get value for every one of those that we can. Again, if you're new to the story, Bonnie Claire is larger than the size of Manhattan Island, just huge. And we are working in a very concentrated area in an effort to basically get this preliminary feasibility study done as quickly as we can. But there's just potential so much more all over the place. So I would assume that we're going to have essentially assays back. I would say let's probably, you know, anywhere in, I don't know, 6 weeks, 2 months type of thing, because this is going to be another suite of over 2,000 feet of assays. We're going to have a lot more news in the meantime. We're going to be talking about the seismic, which I expect to hear back from by Christmas. We're still waiting to hear on basically the metallurgical the metallurgical results on lithium hydroxide that we're looking to produce. Again, we've already done battery grade lithium carbonate. Frankly, we've done it twice, one at greater volume than the other. And then we're going to continue to talk about, you know, our additional drill holes that are coming through here. So there's a lot of moving parts here. All of them are good. When you see massive intercepts like this, I can't tell you if, frankly, if they're the best in Nevada. We'd have to come to some way of evaluating them, you know, on, I don't know, a gram meter type of thing that they do with gold mining, et cetera. Frankly, I don't think it really matters. I mean, these types of grades are now very similar to what you see in other projects. They're, though, you know, massive widths. They're at different depths. I mean, everything that we see here is going to be individualistic, and we will address that as we go forward. But for now, I just wanted to, you know, point out that this is extremely good news. All else being equal, grade is certainly king when it comes to profitability, things like that. But we don't think that this is the last of us. And I look at this as sort of an early Christmas present from Bonnie Claire, but I don't think it's the last one. So Max, that's probably enough talking for me at this point in time. And why don't we open it up for questions, and we'll see if I can shed any more light on what's going on.
Perfect. Thank you, Steve. I'll leave this slide here open because I think it's a great visual to have for those that are in the room here. So the first question here is, how much more expensive will extraction get for the lithium at these levels, if any at all?
Okay, I would say at this point in time, there's no indication that the extraction cost. Hold on a second, Max. Was that recovery cost or the extraction cost?
In the question it says extraction, but why don't you just cover?
Okay, yeah. So sorry, the reason I just want to sort of split hairs because there are two issues I want to address. So the extraction cost. So if we talk about borehole mining, as what we think is the preferred method of mining right now. And again, there's works going on with Kinley Exploration, who are the experts in this, and I expect that report back by Christmas. And they've been looking at cores, the existing holes, to see again about the way this material would crumble under high pressure water, all of these sorts of things. And frankly, the body language has been very good from what they've been saying, but we're waiting for the final report. To go a couple hundred feet lower, and let's just assume, if this were the same phenomena everywhere, it would be incremental costs because you would already have the hole in place. Again, think about the concept. You take a drill rig, a vertical drill rig, you go down to the depth that you want. The drill rig's already in place. This material is very friable, and you're essentially eroding it away with high pressure water. What the rate of penetration or excavation would be on a given day, that's going to depend a lot on what Kinley tells us. Everything from how many gallons, a minute you're going to use, the pressures that you need, et cetera, those kinds of things. But we're not jumping here, like from 2,000 to 4,000 feet deep right now. And that's sort of why the way I think about it, if we progress into other areas at the geological basement and say this phenomenon continues, we might end up with a different mining technique that we might be able to apply. But the way I think about it for right now, the borehole mining, this would just be keeping essentially the drill rig in place for another period of time. As I recall from the PEA, we're talking about excavating 1,500 tons a day from a certain sized cylinder volume from each of those rigs. And again, the PEA anticipates, I think it's 14 rigs doing this on a daily basis to get us that 32,000 tons of LCE a year. But if you got to stay there, frankly, the way I think about it, it's more time in place doing the excavation. Overall, probably costs should come down because you're not moving more frequently that rig. The second point I just want to say is, when I got sort of a little bit confused there about the extraction, I also think about extraction in terms of recovery, right? So what's going on at Hazen Labs in Colorado, the people who are doing our metallurgy, at this point in time, everything looks the same. This mineralization is consistent in terms of, basic types and everything like that, meaning that the recovery flow sheet should work, essentially across these broad expanses of the upper and the lower zones that we have. So don't anticipate any problems like this. Like we're not seeing a brand new bunch of geology coming here or rock formations or anything like that. So, from what I can see, this is all good. So hopefully I managed to answer that question.
Okay, thanks for that. I think that answers it. Here's another question here. Will there be more drill results released this year? And I think you kind of answered that, but maybe more broadly, what are the upcoming catalysts for this year and the beginning of next year?
Yeah, the drill results. So we're sitting here, almost at U.S. Thanksgiving. So my gut tells me we're not going to have another core hole. The proper way from a QA/QC perspective to talk about these holes is to give everybody, sort of the whole shooting match here at once, not just saying, oh, hey, here's the top and then here's the bottom. The correct way is to give everything at once. That's a lot of core, okay? I mean, I'm just telling you, some of the differences that I've noticed over time is even cutting the core is sort of a whole different ballgame than what you might be accustomed to because the material tends to be so soft. So, our fella in the core shack who's really, really adept at what he's doing is to take extra time to make sure that essentially things aren't collapsing because it really is important to make sure that you understand, even within a given interval, let's say a given 20 feet or whatever, that you've got everything in sequence. It becomes particularly important when you're starting to evaluate, the materials, like, for example, what we're doing with the sonic drilling, where we're looking at the strength of potential open pit walls, slope stability, things like that. So the point in saying all of this is that it's a long process. Now, we have definitely allocated extra money for the rush job when this stuff gets to the lab. And in the grand scheme of things, honestly, it's not that much. But the point is there's just so much material to go through. It takes time to do it. So, realistically, people are going to be shutting down for the holidays. Out in the West, guys are going to go deer hunting. All sorts of stuff's going to be happening, going to be slowing things down. But we will be talking about things that have been in progress or set in progress earlier in the year. And again, I go back to, okay, we've got a seismic study that the interpretation I think is going to be a lot of fun, frankly, to go through and to present to the markets, because it's a whole other side to the optionality, right? The whole brine story, which frankly was the origin of Bonnie Claire, and now we're just getting back to. But we're going to be talking about that. We're going to be talking again about what we're finding out with borehole mining and what the engineers suggest is possible and what we could try. And then we're going to have, I hope, the metallurgy relatively soon that we could talk about with regards to lithium hydroxide. So I'm doing my best to keep as much news flow coming out here, over time. I understand how the markets are. I will tell you what's interesting is that a lot of people still have never heard of us, who it's not such a surprise because, hey, we're just getting started again. But I guess who have never really heard about the lithium story. So I'm spending a lot of time educating people about lithium. And I may be trying some things with social media to try to bring in a sort of a more broad audience than just mining people, to introduce them to lithium in the story. So, to Maxim's suggestion here, talking about news flow, we got a lot of stuff lined up, but only part of that will be core hole assays, which I think you should expect sort of at the beginning of next year.
I think it's a great answer. So thank you for that. Have you heard of One World Lithium's DLE technology that uses a patented carbon dioxide injection method to extract lithium carbonate from brines? My understanding is that it uses no chemicals, membranes, ion exchange, or other complex process, and it eliminates the requirement for evaporation ponds, asks David here.
Yeah, I have heard of it, and it certainly sounds wonderful. I guess there's two things I would say about it. First of all, for all the brine operations out there, it's great because, right, those settling ponds, we've all seen the pictures of them in South America and everything. They're becoming a real hotspot for pushback by the environmentalists and local communities, et cetera. And the amount of water that's basically just given up to evaporation is tremendous. But the second point is to remember, at this point in time, right, we don't have brines here at Bonnie Claire. If we were to find brines, there's no doubt we would be looking at all the DLE extraction techniques, including that, to see about trying to bring this up in the most ESG friendly way possible. Remember, part of our story here has been from the very beginning to try to broadcast to particular the lithium end users, just how benign we're looking to produce any lithium that we find here. Obviously it's important to the lithium end users in there. I'm talking specifically about the car companies, because they want to use that for their customers. Like, hey, we got electric vehicles, we're using batteries that are made with lithium that's produced in the most friendly possible way, et cetera, et cetera. Now, any of you who have been around the mining industry know that really 99.999% of the people involved would want to do things that way anyway. And obviously we're no different. We understand that the communities surrounding, Bonnie Claire don't want to be negatively impacted. We're going to do everything that we can to positively impact them, in terms of the economics of what's going on, the environment. I mean, this is the way I think about it. And I've got kids, I got grandkids. When I'm long gone, this stuff is all going to be around. This is all about the future. Obviously, think the EV cars, whether you agree with them or not, it was put in place here because of the future. So it's incumbent upon us to make sure that this stuff is all going to be done in as benign a way as possible, with every positive attribute basically, maximized and every negative attribute minimized. And this is all still very conceptual. I try to tell people how I look at it, as I used to be an institutional investor, but I want to be careful because, there can be a lot of arm waving here. But when you look at what we're finding, I think the basic thing to remember is right now is there's just massive amounts of lithium. You can't always represent them in a resource report. It gets a little squirrely because we don't want to go backwards in here, frankly, in terms of just saying, hey, we've got the greatest resource for the sake of saying it. We already have economics attached to where we are. They're preliminary economic assessment economics, and we're looking to upgrade them as we go forward. But there's a very well thought out process in here that was started years ago by the Canadian authorities in terms of 43-101. And we're going right through that process. So, the DLE stuff I think is very, very interesting. Right now, it doesn't have applicability to us, but we will certainly keep our eye on it going into the future.
Perfect. Thanks, Steve. A comment plus a question here for you. So, Steve, congrats on the results with this deeper drilling, hitting higher grades. How would this impact the new resource estimate, grade and LCE?
Yeah, and that's the thing. I got to be honest. I don't know. I'm not an engineer. I don't even think the mining engineers would necessarily want to talk about that right now on the one hole. There's a lot of things that come to it. You can identify all that resource, but then you have to bring in the mining techniques. And so that's going to be, what basically Kinley and Barr tell us about the way the rock behaves down there, and, the economics of using the borehole. All that kind of stuff has to be brought into play when we talk about the resource. But this is what I would point out. We're already using 5 or 6% of our existing resource for 40 years at 30,000 tons, right? In my mind, we can upgrade just based upon essentially our existing resource down to 2,000 feet, and we could talk about that. I think this is all opening up optionality for, essentially multiple projects. I don't want to go backwards in time with what we're doing at Bonnie Claire, and because time is really critical here. Every time I talk to car companies, the first question is always, how quickly can you get this, get the lithium to us? And if we start making too many changes, then we could potentially lose time. Now, optionality is something too. I just want to make sure I'm clear about with people. It would be a complex thing to start, carving. Let's just say carving Bonnie Claire up into different pieces and different, into different projects, if that were to happen. And you would have to look at them all individually to make sure that they were all accretive, right? At this point in time, shareholder value is going to be maximized essentially by our minimizing dilution, and then trying to, essentially prove that we have more value, so that we're taking an even bigger pie and we're slicing up with fewer slices. I don't know exactly how this how this deeper mineralization is going to manifest itself in terms of a resource. But I think logic just dictates, it's the way you think about it, is that more is clearly better here. And it's going to help in some way, whether or not it's the way we think about our existing resource, or maybe different areas. Things change, even though, again, these are essentially, the way I think about it, 2 large blankets of lithium with essentially a pocket or a different layer in the center where we don't have the lithium. But they vary in between. I mean, your mind gets a little bit messed up because these intercepts are so massive, thousands of feet of this kind of stuff. But inside, 1,000 feet here or 1,000 feet there are some variations in terms of grades, and you can address that in different ways, we think, with the borehole mining, or potentially where you situate an open pit, if it were to come to that. So I wouldn't worry too much on how this latest data is going to manifest itself in a resource, because we have more than enough already. That being said, it's certainly all positive, and that's the way I would look at it for now.
Great answer. Chris here asks, are there any mines out there that are currently running that you could compare to the Bonnie Claire trajectory?
I'm not sure what the word trajectory there means, so I'll just take a guess with some stuff here. In terms of timeline, trajectory, say, to production, we're behind we're behind Thacker Pass. I think they're talking about starting construction at the end of the year, maybe the beginning of next year. I'm never quite sure what's going on up there, but of course, we don't have an endangered species we don't have flora, we don't have fauna, anything like that. But we would be coming in after them. I believe that a lot of the other sort of sedimentary deposits, most of them would probably be coming in around the same time, maybe some of them a little bit earlier. The brine ones, I think, are just sort of starting to get going. When I think about the ones up by Albemarle, Silver Peak, I know there's, a bunch of little ones in there. The one very similar one that I will talk about in terms of geology, and it's, as far as I know, the only one that has got the same geology in terms of when we talk about clays or sediments, was Bacanora, which is in the Sonoran Desert on the other side of the Mexican border. And they had an earlier start that we did. The Chinese bought them a couple of years ago. But I don't know if you saw the recent news where their title was just called into question. So that's obviously going to set them back. So, there's an example of, frankly, what happens more often than not, just in developing natural resources, where you have setbacks for different reasons. And of course, that's just a wonderful example of how valuable our jurisdiction is, being in the U.S. and in particular being in Nevada, which is always ranked, within the top 3 by the Fraser Institute. And then, of course, if any of you have seen me on the recent videos where I talk about how wonderful, the governor of Nevada, how wonderful his most recent Toronto visit was with regards to an interview that he gave, where he said, "Hey, we're open for business. We want to extract value from the entire lithium chain from start to finish. Hey, my Canadian friends, tell me how we're going to do it, et cetera, et cetera." I mean, you're just going to ask for anything more supportive. So, everybody, there's a lot of people at the starting gate. There's some people who are, a couple of yards or meters out of the blocks, whatever. I'm just we're keeping our head down. We're trying to accelerate things as quickly and whenever we can. I do think PFS is a natural inflection point. But I think that, sooner or later, lithium prices, this sort of backdrop of stagnating lithium prices, is going to abate, because it's just very typical for commodities. And you're going to see essentially a lot of end users come to earlier stage developers, I'd say, like we are, to start, and you'll start to see things in the news. So there's a lot of moving pieces here. And even if you look at our presentation at the map of Nevada and you see, some of the projects that are there, that's not nearly all of them. I mean, you've all heard me say, I truly believe Nevada is going to become the centerpiece of the lithium industry going forward, almost by default, probably the centerpiece of the world's lithium industry. We'll see.
All right, excellent. Thank you for that. So that looks like that's all the time and questions. Actually, hang on one second. We have another question here. So saved by the bell here. So for those of us who are less familiar with the process, at what stage do you start working on a pilot plant? End of PFS or in DFS?
I'm thinking about end of PFS. I realistically, the engineers, what I've been told so far is we don't need a pilot plant for our PFS. One of the interesting things, and again, a lot of this is nuance. So we produced the battery grade lithium carbonate at the benchtop scale, and that's fine. Obviously you have to start somewhere. As we've been working our way towards hydroxide, we produced lithium grade battery carbonate as a precursor to that hydroxide at a much greater scale. I think it was 30 or 50 times greater volume. And the point of my saying that is that all of the processes held together. Now, this would be an evolution. You would continue to increase the size of what you're doing, the reactor vessels, all that kind of thing as you go forward, and then ultimately to a pilot plant. But there's a trade-off with gaining that knowledge earlier, which is that it would be the cost of the pilot plant. And we're just getting going here again in terms of marketing. As I said, not only do people not know us as a company, I'm still very surprised at the number of people who really aren't familiar with sort of the overall lithium backdrop as to what's going on and how there is no lithium going forward with this tremendous built-in demand. But the pilot plant would cost, a significant amount of our market capitalization. So to get all that money would require a tremendous amount of additional dilution that I don't think would be in our best interest, meaning ours, meaning shareholders' interest, to do now. So if we could do it at a later point in time, after the marketing has started to take effect, after the news is better, perhaps we get a little bit of a tailwind coming around here with lithium prices. Obviously, tax selling season is in effect, and unfortunately, I think perhaps we had some iconic shareholders who didn't want to hang around for longer. But all of these types of things, when we look at it, I think lead us to the fact that We continue to do stuff in Hazen at the benchtop and slightly larger levels. That's great for now, and we're going to address the pilot plant in the future. You know, right now I'm targeting PFS. I think the end of 2024 is very reasonable. You know, given all the challenges that companies our size face, but that's essentially the target, and I would think about that pilot plant afterwards.
Perfect, thank you. We got another question here, so we'll take this last question. I know you mentioned about finding talent. Is that still a risk, and and what are the costs associated with hiring them?
Finding talent? Well, finding talent is, you know, that's sort of an industry-wide, I don't want to say problem, challenge. However, I mean, I don't consider that we've had that problem. Now, we have not gone out to really start assembling a team, right, for, say, the construction of Bonnie Claire or anything like that. We have a very, very experienced what would be the correct word? Very qualified set of technical people along with us. So we just start with them. Now, Richard Kern, who's CEO of Iconic and who is now our Chief Operating Officer, has got a tremendous amount of historical knowledge of Bonnie Claire. He staked it. So, you know, it's invaluable, his understanding. His son, Rick, also works with us. Those two have been working together, good Lord, I don't even know for how long. Tremendous knowledge, experience, and dedication to what's going on. Very, very adept, very, very proficient in what's going on. And we have Jeff Wilson, who's been with us from Nevada Lithium. Jeff's got his doctorate in structural geologist, and he's been geologist for, I think it was the Toronto or the Venture, making sure that people stayed on track and stayed on side, as our Canadian friends love to say, you know, with regards to QA, QC, all these sorts of things. I mean, and then we, of course, you know, we have Darren as technical advisor with us at this point in time. So just a tremendous amount of knowledge. Our CFO, Catherine, has experience with public companies. She knows what's going on, you know, and we have a great board who's multi-talented. So, you know, I think we are in great shape going forward as we go to expand the team. We'll be looking for people with very specific sets of skills, right? And a lot of that, I think, is going to be predicated upon how, you know, what's the ultimate form of Bonnie Claire? What's it going to be? And again, are there going to be multiples, et cetera? So will there be challenges in finding correct people? Absolutely. It's one of the hardest things to do in any business, is find the correct people that, you know, can work well with your existing team, et cetera, and to find the skill sets. Now, one of the last things I'll say here as we run out of time is, this is part of the thing that I go back to when I talk about the future, right? And the actual value of a project like Bonnie Claire that perhaps isn't necessarily shown by the numbers. And that's the value to the surrounding communities and the way I think about it in terms of the future. The jobs that are going to be available as these things all develop, right, are going to be varied. You're going to have people who are going to be out doing construction, people who are moving things from one area to another, people who are bringing things to the project. Then you're going to have your geologists, you're going to have metallurgists, you're going to have just a plethora of different skills that are going to be needed, in my opinion, when the time comes and the construction decision is made, et cetera. You know, I would think you would be talking about jobs like those for literally decades and decades and decades. And that's why it's important to basically have an alignment with the local communities, the state, and the federal. And that's one of the beautiful things, again, about where we are in Nevada, particularly with Nevada's ability to help us talk to the local communities, as well as to help the federal government interpret what's going on down at the ground level and help, you know, ease our path through, you know, all the existing hurdles. But to the local communities, I want to make sure that I make it very clear, because I know we're starting to get more attention. I've been out, obviously, in front of the cameras much more lately. This is at the very beginning. All of this is very good news. I will be out speaking with you more frequently as we go forward, keeping you advised, you know, of what's going on. But everything that I'm saying here is everything that I would say to you, you know, privately, as I get out to Nevada more often and we can sit and meet there. This is all good news. We're going to obviously be good stewards of what's going on, as we have been so far. And I think this is going to have a tremendous amount of opportunity for everybody going forward, not just shareholders. So I don't know if there are any more questions after that, Max, but maybe that's a good place to end.
Yeah, I think that's all the time we have for today. So thank you, Steve, for taking us through the updates and the Q&A session. I also want to thank everyone who submitted the questions. And today's recording will be available to watch on demand in the coming hours. And so feel free to look out for that. And you can find more information on Nevada Lithium by going to the website. So before we wrap up, just passing things back over to you, Steve, for any closing remarks.
I appreciate everybody taking the time. I know a lot of folks are getting ready for Thanksgiving. Obviously, I hope everybody has a wonderful holiday season. I hope I'm speaking to everybody again before Christmas, but if not, have a wonderful Christmas. We have a lot that's going on here at Bonnie Claire. I will keep everybody apprised. Again, as the market headwinds sort of rear their ugly heads at times, try to take comfort in what I think there's just a tremendous amount of inherent value here. We're working very hard to start unlocking that, and I think we're all going to be well rewarded when this is all said and done.